Masters in Psychology in IGNOU, MPC 1, that is Cognitive Psychology. We are doing the third unit of block 1, that is Information Processing, and the unit that we are going to do is Neuropsychological Basis of Learning and Memory. In this third unit, we will have memory and brain, human memory, brain damage and amnesia, brain surgery and memory loss, amnesia and the medial temporal lobe, memory consolidation and hippocampus, anterior and lateral temporal lobes and memory, animal models of memory, imaging the human brain and memory, episodic encoding and retrieval, semantic encoding and retrieval, procedural memory encoding and retrieval, perceptual priming and implicit and explicit memory, cellular basis of learning and memory. So let's start from memory and brain. Human memory, brain damage and amnesia. Deficits in memory as a function of brain damage, disease or psychological trauma are known as amnesia. Amnesia can involve either the inability to learn new things or a loss of previous knowledge or both. It can differentially affect short-term or working memory and long-term memory abilities. Thus, by examining amnesia in conjunction with cognitive theories derived from experiments on normal subjects, we can understand the organization of memory at a functional and neural level. Much compelling information about the organization of human memory during amnesia was first derived from medical treatments that left patients amnesic. Brain surgery and memory loss. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, surgeons attempted to treat neurological and psychiatric disease using a variety of neurosurgical procedures, including prefrontal lobotomy, that is removing or disconnecting the prefrontal lobe, corpus callosotomy, that is surgically sectioning the corpus callosum, amygdalotomies, that is removing the amygdala, and temporal lobe dissection, removal of the temporal lobe. These surgical procedures opened a new window on human brain function as they revealed, usually quite by accident, fundamentally important principles of the organization of human cognition. One surgical procedure relevant to memory was removal of the medial portion of the temporal lobe, including the hippocampal formation. In 1953, a medical conference, the neurosurgeon William Bishop Scoville from Montreal Neurological Institute reported on bilateral removal of the medial temporal lobe in one epileptic patient and several schizophrenic patients. Shortly thereafter, he wrote, bilateral resection of the uncus and amygdalum alone or in conjunction with the entire pyriform amygdaloid hippocampal complex has resulted in no marked physiologic or behavioral changes, with the one exception of a very grave recent memory loss so severe as to prevent the patient from remembering the locations of the rooms in which he lives, the names of his close associates, or even the way to the toilet. Scoville in 1954. Scoville and psychologist Brenda Milner did the neuropsychological examination of 10 patients. Milner found that memory impairments in the patients having medial temporal lobe resection as part of their treatment were in relation to how much of the medial temporal lobe was removed. The further posterior along the medial temporal lobe, the resection was the worst of the amnesia. Strikingly, however, only bilateral resection of the hippocampus resulted in severe amnesia. In comparison, in one patient whose entire right medial temporal lobe was removed, no residual memory deficit was found. But the interesting patient was the young man who had bilateral medial temporal resection. So in the figure, we can see over here medial view of human brain. In this brain, this part is the hippocampus over here. Then the amygdala above that. Pituitary is there shown here. Hypothalamus. Then this area is known as prefrontal cortex. Then cingulate gyrus. This is cingulate gyrus. Septum might be the liquid in that. Then basal ganglia, fornix, thalamus. This whole thing is called thalamus, on which this gland is there. Then medulla and pons. The case history of patient HM. HM was a young man who suffered from a difficult to treat form of epilepsy that progressed in severity during his teen years. Over the years, his physicians had treated him with the available drugs to minimize his seizures, but these drugs were largely ineffective for him. As his seizures worsened in his 20s, he decided to try a then radical new therapy that involved surgery. At that time, neurologists knew that many seizures originated in the medial portions of the temporal lobe and from there spread to other areas of the brain, leading to violent seizures and often loss of consciousness. It was also becoming increasingly clear that surgically removing the brain region is in which the seizure activity originated, the so-called seizure focus, could help patients with epilepsy. The decision in HM's case was to remove his medial temporal lobe bilaterally in a procedure called temporal lobectomy. So in this picture, we can find here major areas of the brain. That is, auditory region is situated over here. Temporal lobe is there. Then Broca's area in left hemisphere. Prefrontal area, frontal lobe, sensory motor area, parietal lobe, visual, then visual association, auditory association. So each part of the brain has different sort of reason what it functions as. So following recovery from this major neurosurgical procedure, HM's epilepsy did improve. The surgery was a success, both with regard to his surviving the risk associated with any surgery of the brain and with regard to the epilepsy. However, physicians, family, and friends began to realize that HM was experiencing new difficulties. For example, a year and a half after the surgery, which was performed in September 1953, HM displayed clear problems with his memory. Although it was April 1955 and HM was 29 years old, he reported his age to be 27. HM would say he did not remember ever meeting certain individuals even when he actually spoke to them a few minutes earlier, and they merely left the room. Returning after a short delay, HM was profoundly amnesic. That is, he suffered from disorders of memory. However, HM did not have the kind of amnesia one sees depicted in television shows or movies, where the character has a total loss of all prior memories. Indeed, HM knew who he was and could remember things about his life. That is, up until a period prior to his surgery. However, it became increasingly clear that HM could not form new long term memories. Formal neuropsychological tests were performed on HM to establish the nature of his cognitive deficit. These tests showed that his intelligence was well above normal after the surgery. He also had no perceptual or language problems and seemed generally fine with no changes in his personality or motivation. However, when memory tests were administered, HM scored well below normal. The bilateral removal of HM's medial temporal lobe produced a highly selective deficit in his memory ability, leaving other cognitive functions intact. HM had normal short-term memory, sensory registers and working memory, but he developed a severe and permanent inability to acquire and store new information. Amnesia and the medial temporal lobe. Which reason or reasons of the medial temporal lobe were critical for supporting the long-term memory ability lost in HM? The medial temporal area includes the amygdala, the hippocampus, the entorhinal cortex, and the surrounding parahippocampal and perirhinal cortical areas. Okay, this is in this figure that we have over here. Prefrontal cortex. For the past 40 years, scientists studying HM used surgical reports of his lesions to guide theories of memory and amnesia and their neural basis. Reports by Scoville, who performed the surgery, indicated that all of HM's hippocampus in each hemisphere had been removed. HM's brain and surgical lesions were re-evaluated with improved accuracy with high-resolution neuroimaging methods such as magnetic resonance imaging. And it was found that in addition to the hippocampus, some of HM's surrounding cortex was also removed. Is damage to the hippocampus sufficient to block the information of new long-term memories? Consider another patient, RB, who lost his memory after an ischemic episode, reduction of blood to brain, during bypass surgery. RB developed dense anterograde amnesia similar to HM's. He could not form long-term memories. He also had retrograde amnesia that extended back to 1 to 2 years, slightly less severe than HM's. Stem's retrograde loss. After his death, RB's brain was donated for studies, permitting a detailed analysis of the extent of his neuroanatomical damage. In RB's case, lesions were found to be restricted to his hippocampus. Within each hippocampus, RB had sustained a specific lesion restricted to the CA1 pyramidal cells. These findings in patient RB support the idea that the hippocampus is crucial in forming a new long-term memories. RB's case also supports the distinction between areas that store long-term memories and the role of the hippocampus in forming new memories. Even though retrograde amnesia is associated with medial temporal lobe damage, it is temporally limited and does not affect long-term memories of events that happened more than a few years prior to the amnesia-inducing event. Memory consolidation and hippocampus. Memories are solidified in long-term stores over days, weeks, months, and years. This process is referred to as consolidation, an old concept that refers to how long-term memory develops over time after initial acquisition. From a cognitive neuroscience perspective, consolidation is conceived of as biological changes that underlie the long-term retention of learned information, and we can ask what brain structures and systems support this process. Because damage to the medial temporal lobe does not wipe out most of the declarative memories formed over a lifetime. We know that the hippocampus is not the repository of stored language. Rather, the medial temporal lobe appears to support the process of forming new memories. That is, the hippocampal region is critical for the consolidation of information in long-term memory. The strongest evidence that the hippocampus is involved in consolidation comes from the fact that amnesists have retrograde amnesia for memories from 1 to a few years prior to damage to the medial temporal lobe, or diencephalon, a pattern that does not support a storage role but rather a role in consolidation. What might consolidation entail at the neural level? One idea is that consolidation strengthens the association between multiple stimulus inputs and activations of previously stored information. The hippocampus is hypothesized to coordinate this strengthening, but the effects are believed to take place in neocortex. The idea is that once consolidation is complete, the hippocampus is no longer required for storage or retrieval. Nonetheless, keep in mind that although the memories are stored in the neocortex, the hippocampus is crucial for consolidation. Alcoholic Korsakoff syndrome and diencephalic amnesia. The medial temporal lobe is not the only area of interest in human memory. Amnesia emerges from brain damage in other regions too. For example, damage to midline structures of the diencephalon of the brain causes amnesia. The prime structures are the dorsomedial nucleus of the thalamus and the mammillary bodies. Damage to these midline subcortical regions can be caused by stroke, tumors, and metabolic problems like those brought on by chronic alcoholism as well as by trauma. In the last half of the 19th century, the Russian psychiatrist Sergei Korsakoff reported an anterograde and retrograde amnesia associated with alcoholism. Long-term alcohol abuse can lead to vitamin deficiencies that cause brain damage. Patients suffering from alcoholic Korsakoff syndrome have degeneration in the diencephalon, especially the dorsomedial nucleus of the thalamus and the mammillary bodies. It remains unclear whether the dorsomedial thalamic nucleus, the mammillary bodies, or both are necessary for the patient's amnesia. Nonetheless, damage to the diencephalon can produce amnesia. Arterial and lateral temporal lobes and memory. If, as suggested earlier, the neocortex is crucial for the storage of memories, then it should be possible to demonstrate retrograde amnesia with cortical damage. Even though most amnesias are anterograde, in line with this proposal, amnesia can be caused by damage to regions of the neocortex. One reason of special interest is the temporal neocortex outside the medial temporal lobe. Lesions that damage the lateral cortex of the anterior temporal lobe near the anterior pole lead to a dense amnesia that includes severe retrograde amnesia. In such cases, the entorhinal cortex and perihippocampal cortex may be involved. The retrograde amnesia may be severe, extending back many decades before the amnesia inducing event occurred or encompassing the patient's entire life. Various forms of damage can lead to this condition. Progressive neurological diseases like Alzheimer's and herpes simplex encephalitis involving viral infection of the brain are two such conditions. Some patients with dense retrograde amnesia might still form new long-term memories. This type of amnesia is called isolated retrograde amnesia. It is particularly related to damage of the anterior temporal lobe. This portion of the temporal lobe is not therefore essential for acquiring new information. Are these lateral and anterior regions of the temporal lobe the sites of storage of long-term declarative memories? The answer is maybe. But another view is that these regions may be particularly important for the retrieval of information from long-term stores when there are memories stored. More recent evidence from neuroimaging studies suggests that memories are stored as distributed representation throughout neocortex, involving the regions that originally encoded the perceptual information and regions representing information that was associated with this incoming information. As noted in the last section, the medial temporal lobe may coordinate the consolidation of this information over time. Animal modes of memory. Animal models of memory. Animal models have been key to our understanding of the psychological and physiological underpinnings of the many diseases states. For example, in the field of learning and memory, animal models have been instrumental in shaping our understanding of how the normal and damaged brain process information. Animal research has taught us that there are multiple memory systems that interact competitively, cooperatively, or in a parallel depending on the cognitive demands and psychological nature of the task. Studies in monkeys with lesions to the hippocampus and surrounding cortex have been invaluable in learning about the contribution of the medial temporal lobe to the primate memory systems. Learning and memory are complex phenomena requiring the coordinated interaction of multiple brain structures. The diencephalon, a subcortical region that includes the thalamus and hypothalamus, has been characterized as an integral connection zone for many memory related circuits. There are connections between the thalamus and the hypothalamus as well as the amygdala and striatum. All three of those reasons are important for different types of memory. Although in both the human condition of WKS and the PTD model, there appears to be no gross hippocampal neuroanatomical alteration. Hippocampal related behaviors appear to be impaired. The use of animal models provides us with an unique opportunity to access neural function in one brain region after damage to another while the animal is cognitively challenged. Recently, we have used in vivo microdialysis to observe the interaction between the hippocampus and the diencephalus using the PTD model while the animals are solving a maze task. This study demonstrated that the behavioral impairment produced by diencephalic damage (PTD treatment) is accompanied by decreased release of acetylcholine efflux in the hippocampus that is usually evident under certain environmental conditions. PTD treated rats display a reduction in hippocampal ACH efflux when they are navigating a maze and cognitively processing spatial information. In contrast, when PTD treated rats are in a home case, not cognitively challenged, they have normal hippocampal ACH levels. This study demonstrated the importance of the nature of the behavioral activity when assessing neurological dysfunction. Psychological challenges drive brain activation, and understanding brain activity under different behavioral states will be critical for the development of therapeutics. Imaging the human brain and memory. Episodic encoding and retrieval, given the purported role of the hippocampus system in encoding memory in long-term stores. Researchers have eagerly addressed this issue using positron emission tomography (PET) and functional magnetic resonance imaging (fMRI). One such line of work involved face encoding and recognition. The question was whether the hippocampus becomes active when encoding new information. James Haxby, Risley Unger leader, and their colleagues at the NIMH presented subjects with pictures of either faces or nonsense patterns, and using PET investigated memory performance in different conditions. Subjects were required to remember the face, recognize the face, and perceptually analyze the face by comparing two faces. During these periods, PET scans recorded changes in regional cerebral blood flow triggered by local neuronal activity. These investigators observed that the right hippocampus region was activated during encoding of the face but not during recognition, where retrieval processes should have been engaged. These data are consistent with those from amnesic patients who had medial temporal lobe damage that led to anterograde amnesia but preserved distant retrograde memories. Encoding also activated the left prefrontal cortex, whereas recognition activated the right prefrontal cortex. Thus, we have more support for the hippocampus role in memory as well as possible support for hemispheric asymmetries in memory functions. Encoding and retrieval processes were lateralized in the left and right hemispheres, respectively, giving rise to a model with the acronym of HERA, which stands for Hemispheric Encoding Retrieval Asymmetry. This model represents the idea that encoding involves the left hemisphere more than the right, and retrieval involves the right hemisphere more than the left. Both processes predominantly involve the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. In encoding and retrieving information from long-term memory, neocortical areas were the most activated. Some more recent studies made use of event-related fMRI methods to track the processing of individual items as a function of the success of the encoding as indexed by later memory performance. Anthony Wagner and his colleagues at MIT, Howard University, and Massachusetts General Hospital, and John Gabrielli and his colleagues at Stanford, Brewer et al., conducted such studies. They presented subjects with items and scanned their brains using of MRI while they were encoding the information, and then later tested them for their memories of the items. Each research group found that event-related responses were larger in prefrontal and medial temporal regions during encoding of words or pictures that were later remembered. Semantic encoding and retrieval.
The encoding and retrieval of semantic knowledge also have been studied using functional neuroimaging, and significant new findings have been uncovered. In particular, evidence for domain-specific organization, that is, knowledge of animate and inanimate objects is localized in different cortical regions, has proved to be a fascinating story. Unlike episodic retrieval that activates the right prefrontal cortex, semantic retrieval involves the left prefrontal cortex. The region includes Broca's area, Brodmann's area, 44 extending into area 46, and the ventral lateral region, Brodmann's areas 44 and 45, which is shown in figure 1.33. This lateralization to the left hemisphere remains regardless of whether the memories being retrieved are of objects or words. Procedural memory encoding and retrieval earlier was learned that amnesics demonstrate implicit learning of motor sequences even when they cannot form explicit memories about the stimulus sequence. Amnesics provide powerful evidence that implicit learning need not be mediated by explicit knowledge about the material. Scott Grafton, Elliot Hazeltine, and Ivory investigated in 1995 the brain basis of procedural motor learning in normal subjects. They compared conditions in which the subjects learn motor sequences implicitly during dual task condition, which helped to prevent subjects from explicitly noticing and learning the sequence. PET conducted during the dual task condition demonstrated activation of the motor cortex and the supplementary motor area of the left hemisphere and the putamen in the basal ganglia bilaterally. Also activated were the rostral prefrontal cortex and parietal cortex. Therefore, when subjects were implicitly learning the task, brain areas that control limb movements were activated. When the distracting auditory task was removed, the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, right premotor cortex, right putamen, and parieto-occipital cortex were activated bilaterally. Perceptual priming and implicit memory. Daniel Scatter and his colleagues at Harvard University investigated the neural basis of perceptual priming in a PET study. The scanning was performed only during the task. Subjects manifested implicit priming behaviorally. No activations or deactivation were noted in the hippocampus, but blood flow in the bilateral occipital cortex decreased. The hippocampus was not activated then, and even though implicit perceptual priming was obtained. The conclusions from this and other studies are that implicit and explicit retrieval of information is observed by separate brain systems. Together with the face encoding data Haxby and colleagues obtained by PET and animal and human lesion data, a reasonable conclusion is that the hippocampus encodes new information but also retrieves recent information when explicit recollection is involved. Perhaps more interestingly, deactivation of the visual cortex for previously seen words is a correlate of perceptual priming. In summary, neuroimaging studies have demonstrated patterns of neuronal activation that are consistent with the memory systems derived from cognitive research studies in human amnesics and animal models. Neuroimaging also has provided some notable new findings in the cognitive neuroscience of memory, including, for example, the hemispheric asymmetries in encoding and retrieval. Cellular basis of learning and memory. How does the activity of different brain regions change as memories are formed? Most models of the cellular basis of memory hold that it is the result of changes in the strength of synaptic interaction among neurons in neural networks. How would synaptic strength be altered to enable learning and memory? Neil Carlson describes some basic physiological mechanisms for learning new information. One basic mechanism is Hebb's law, named after the man who posited it. Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb, in 1949, Hebb's rule states that if a synapse between two neurons is repeatedly activated at about the same time, the postsynaptic neuron fibers, the structure of the chemistry of neuron changes and the synapse will be strengthened. This is known as Hebbian learning. A more general and more complex mechanism is called long-term potentiation. In this process, neural circuits in hippocampus that are subjected to repeated and intense electrical stimulation develop hippocampal cells that become more sensitive to stimuli. That an excitatory input and post-synaptic depolarization are needed to produce LTP is explained by the properties of the double-gated N-methyl D-aspartate receptor located on the dendritic spines of postsynaptic neurons that show LTP. Glutamate is the major excitatory transmitter in the hippocampus, and it can bind with NMDA and non-NMDA receptors. When 2-amino-5-phosphonoopentanoate AP5 is introduced to neurons, NMDA receptors are chemically blocked and LTP induction is prevented. But the AP5 treatment does not produce any effect on previously established LTP in these cells. Therefore, NMDA receptors are central to producing LTP but not maintaining it. It turns out that maintenance of LTP may depend on the non-NMDA receptors. Long-term potentiation and memory performance. LTP and memory performance. This effect of enhanced response can last for weeks or even longer, suggesting too many that this could be a mechanism for long-term learning and retention. Disrupting the process of long-term potentiation also disrupts learning and remembering. Chemically blocking LTP in the hippocampus of normal mice impairs their ability to demonstrate normal place learning. Thus, blocking LTP prevents normal spatial memory. In a similar way, genetic manipulation that block the cascade of molecular triggers for LTP also impair spatial learning. These experiments provide strong evidence of impairing spatial memory by blocking NMDA receptors and preventing LTP. Moreover, we are rapidly developing a very clear understanding of the molecular processes that support synaptic plasticity and thus learning and memory in the brain. Unit 10 questions. Summarize the findings of neuropsychological research on localizing memory in the brain. Compare and contrast the human and animal models of the study of neural basis of memory. What exactly do findings from memory studies with amnesic patients tell us about the way memory operates in non-amnesic people? Imagine what it would be like to recover from one of the forms of amnesia. Describe your impressions of and reaction to your newly recovered memory abilities. How would you design an experiment to study the neural process of semantic memory by functional MRI technique? Patient HM and other with damage to the medial temporal lobe develop amnesia. What form of amnesia do they develop, and what information can they retain? And what does this tell us about how memories are encoded in the brain? Thank you so much.